Good evening, everybody. Tonight, Tony, Marr, and myself are going to be talking to Rob Bryan. Rob's a very accomplished and well-known drummer who's played with everybody from Goldfrapp, Peter Gabriel, Suzie. The list goes on, and we're really glad to have you here, Tony, and especially glad to have you here, Rob.
Ah, phone call, excellent. Sorry about that, everyone. Just got a phone call in. Thank you,
Real
chaps.
world.
It's great to be here, and thank you for asking me because it's usually the singers that get these kind of interviews, not the drummer. So I'm very grateful that you're picking out the other musicians of the band. So it's good to be here.
So Tony's got some specific questions. I know he wants to ask you about Susie and so on. So I think for
Okay.
now, just until Tony chops me off, I've got a few more general kind of questions for you, Rob. So how old were you? Actually, first of all, I was going to say how much I like your room. I love your backdrop there. Do you want to just give us a quick run through of what you've got there, Rob?
Yeah, basically, this is where I live, man. It's not set up, it's not a studio. And even when I was a kid, I liked a corner where I could show all my records. And this is just some of them. Some of them are still in my mum's garage because since I moved after the divorce, it's all over the place. But these are my records, my Prince tambourine. That's kind of that's from the 21 nights he did in the O2 many years ago. Then I've got
Wow.
some of the Grammy certificates behind me and my Dalek, and various nerdy things that I've got collected over the years, my Batmobiles and all that kind of stuff. And I've got a Robbie the Robot just here on my coffee table. A bit of a sci-fi nerd, Rich, really.
Love it.
I
Love it.
can't
Love
help
it.
it.
So the tambourine, where did you get that?
I got that at the O2 when
Right.
we went to see him.
Brilliant.
Me and my girlfriend went to see four of the 21 nights that he did in London, and it was really stupidly expensive. I mean, it's made by Remo. It's not the greatest sounding tambourine, but it's something like 50 quid. I know, but I'm a fan, so I thought I'm a drummer, and I actually use it at times as well on certain recordings and stuff. And because it's headed, it sounds quite nice to play with your fingers. So it's
Brilliant.
kind of practical kind of ornament.
Brilliant. I've actually got a great Prince story, but maybe not for now. Maybe for another time with you. But
Excellent.
I'm a big fan as well, and I once accidentally went to see him in a tiny club in the West End
Right.
after one of his Wembley shows. But I'll tell you that another time. Maybe when we cross paths in the future, Rob.
Okay.
So just quickly then. So how old were you when you first started playing music, and what got you into that?
I was 9 years old, and my dad was a jazz drummer, and he'd had this double bass drum kit in the garage from when he retired. He retired in 1970, which is when I was born. And he used to bang about on that. And I used to go down in the garage and watch and listen, but never really turned me on. I was kind of like, it's a drum kit, dad on a drum kit. Okay. And then I started watching Top of the Pops and watching the Stranglers and, Susie, Blondie, Clem Burke, who sadly has just passed away. Then one night in 1979, Gary Numan came on and Tubeway Army and Our Friends Electric, that track. And I just remember just sitting there, I probably having my tea and biscuits, and my jaw just dropped. My parents hated it, which I thought was cool. And that was it. I was just completely sold. And every weekend I'd go out and buy another single or an album. I'd try and collect all the stuff because there was a few Tubeway Army singles before that. And with pocket money, you don't get very much. So it took me a while to accumulate. And then the Pleasure Principle come out with cars on it. And around that time, I guess 1980, John Lennon got shot.
Mm,
And I remember going into school one day and all the teachers were crying and we were like,
mm,
What's going on? And I know some other people who've shared a story similar in different parts of the country.
mm.
And the headmaster or head teacher, as they're called now, gave this speech, and we're going, "What? We don't know this band." Anyway, I go home that night, and all from 6 o'clock onwards on BBC is all Beatle related stuff. And of course, I'd been watching the Monkeys, and I thought, "Hang on, these guys are copying the Monkeys." And my parents were like, "No, no, no, it's the other way around." So then every other weekend I was trying to buy a Beatles record. So I'd be mowing the lawn or doing whatever I could at 10 years of age. So then I collected all my Beatles stuff. And then dad very slowly but surely got me into jazz. Mum hated jazz, so she would get me listening to the Carpenters, the Beach Boys, Bee Gees, all that bread and all that kind of stuff. So I always tell this story that in our house, I could stand in the hallway on a Sunday morning. Dad had the record player in the lounge, and he'd be playing, like it could be anything from like Chick Corea to Miles Davis. On the right hand side, Mum's cooking a roast, listening to all these Dusty Springfield and all this lovely tuneful stuff. So between
Right.
the two, I was getting this kind of, I was into fusion and all that and real muso playing, but I was also enjoying the 3-minute simple pop song and
Mm-hmm.
loving that formula. So it's something that I really only clocked because in all the drum magazines, I've mentioned Dad. And one day, Mum, a few years ago went, "Hey, what about me?" And I was like, my God, Mum, you're completely right.
Yeah,
You
yeah,
did
yeah.
so much as well without being a musician. You introduced me to all this other music. So
Mm-hmm.
between them, that's kind of how it started.
Mm-hmm.
After maybe I guess being a Numan fan for maybe just a couple of months, I was thinking keyboards. So I bought a cheap Woolworth keyboard that, I didn't know what I was doing. And then a Woolworth guitar that was crap, obviously. And then Dad said, the drums are here if you want them. I said, no, no, no. So he sold them. And then I don't know, maybe 4 months later, I was like, "Dad, I want to play drums." And he went absolutely spare because he just sold this kit anyway. But then he said, "I'll teach you, but you're going to start with a pair of sticks, a practice pad, a bass drum pedal, and I'm going to get you doing the rudiments. I'm doing it all properly. And if you earn the kit, you'll get the kit." And so it was a bit like Sergeant Major old school vibes, but it really worked because it got all my technique up together. And then from then on, it was kind of listening to records and he'd just come back with books, reggae drumming, and rock drumming and whatever, big band drumming. And I would just learn myself because I could read the music and off I went. And that was the bug. But I always thank Gary. And I actually saw Gary 2 years ago. He was on some festivals with Siouxsie. He was further down the bill in the day, and we met him quite a few times because his wife Gemma loves Siouxsie, so she dragged me to every Siouxsie event. And every time I see him, I'm like, "Thank you for getting me into music, man. It's your fault." Yeah.
So what about actual players? So what about your earliest influences, actual players who shaped your playing?
I guess obviously Cedric Sharpley with Numan, that was a big thing. And then obviously from there it'd be Ringo. And then it was people like Billy Cobham, Buddy Rich, Art Blakey, Philly Joe Jones. Getting back to Top of the Pops, it was like Jet Black. I really like the way he was so bloody grumpy all the time. But just played for the song the same way that Charlie Watts and Ringo did for the Stones and the Beatles. It was just perfect. You couldn't imagine it. Keith Moon, love Keith Moon. Stuart Copeland was another one. He blew my mind with the Police, even though he sped up like crazy. And funny enough, I wasn't really a Suzie fan at the time because she scared me. 9, 10 years of age, seeing this woman on the TV was like, what? But the drumming, I always enjoyed the drumming, but I had no idea that it would ever come to fruition that I'd play with her. Not in a million years. They were the main influences, and then just shortly after that, we get into the 80s. We're looking at some of the Prince drummers and people like that, Manu Katché with Peter Gabriel and stuff like that. But they were my earliest influences. That first batch of players I gave you.
And were all the influences drummers, or were there other musicians who influenced you playing? Other non-drummers, I mean.
Yeah, I mean, obviously Gary Numan's dystopian songwriting and the synths, that sound, has influenced me now when I'm producing as well. Lennon McCartney, those songs were incredible. Miles Davis, I found there's something in his trumpet playing. Not everyone likes it or digs it. I know they like the compositions a bit more, but I thought Miles is playing. And also Karen Carpenter, I know it's kind of a random, but her voice was just so beautiful. Opened up a lot of things that when I worked with Alison Goldfrapp and stuff, you hear elements of Karen in all these different people. And I think all these references, and when I'm doing clinics and stuff, I always talk to my students about referencing. It's so important. Listening to loads of styles, and even though somebody might not have tried to copy someone else, there's an element of something in there. You can't help it. They leave something in the air that just is there, and we pull from it whether we like it or not.
Yeah, that thing with Karen Carpenter, it's funny. I remember you kind of get to a certain age. When I was a kid, where I grew up in Wales, and when I was a kid, it's not the case now. There's amazing Welsh music now. When I was a kid, a lot of the stuff was just listening to kind of like British or American heavy rock. It was that kind of environment. It's a working class farming environment, So I didn't really get into other music till I left Wales and went to London. And I remember some of my mates would say to me when I was a bit older, "Who's the best singer, Coverdale or Plant?" And I would go Karen Carpenter,
Yes.
Some of that stuff. There's lots of those artists like George Michael as well, who are amazing singers, but they don't
Yeah.
get that kind of kudos, you know. Karen Carpenter, I remember I got into the Carpenters a couple of years ago. I had a festival of Carpenters for a month there, you know, listening to nothing else. And her
Brilliant.
voice is so angel-like, pure and clear, isn't it?
It is beautiful. It is beautiful. And of course, you mentioned the rock people. I should have mentioned Deep Purple. Deep Purple were a band that I found very early on as well. My dad
Yeah,
has the concerto, the group in orchestra.
yeah,
This is the first time like a rock band had played with and it was the year you were born, 1970. Listen to this. There's this great drum. He does a drum solo. It sounds a bit like Buddy Rich and all that. And I was listening to it,
yeah,
and that blew me away. And then
yeah.
from there, I was into, Deep Purple. Was buying their records and Led Zepp as well. But I love Led Zeppelin. I love Bonham. They were fantastic. But for some reason, Deep Purple connect more to me. I guess it's because of the Hammond organ and the fact that there's five of them. And whenever you hear a live recording, nothing's missing. Whereas with Zepp, poor old John Paul Jones was either on the bass or he was on the keyboards, but the
Yeah.
sound always sounded odd when the other instrument wasn't there. Do you know
Hmm.
what I mean? Whereas Purple
Hmm.
were like but equally, Purple's records weren't as good as the Zeppelin records. I think Zeppelin made better sounding records than Purple, but
Yeah.
live, I think Purple were probably a bit more exciting. But Richie
Yes.
Blackmore, thinking about Richie, his
Yeah.
guitar playing influenced me. I kind of like the way that Richie would Eric Clapton, we can name all these great guitarists. But sometimes when I listen to these guys, I'm not saying I know exactly where they're going to go, but kind of roughly where they're going to go. There's
Yeah.
no surprises. Whereas Richie Blackmore and Jeff Beck always did something that you went, what? Even if it was
Yeah.
angular and just a noise, it
Yeah.
was
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
I really love that because you've given us some
Yeah.
bark with your finger picking. You can do all that, and you've done the whammy bar stuff. You've thrown it around a few times. You can do that, and you've done the speed stuff and the tap-ons or whatever hammer-ons. But now you're doing this thing which is just a racket, and I kind of I've got a big space for that. And I think when I fell in love with grunge and punk music, I think there was an element of that sort of like "Rah," that I got from Richie Blackmore. But I
Hmm.
know equally some people say, "Oh no, I don't like it because he does that." Jimmy Page
Yeah.
stays within the sort of squares, and I'm like, "Yeah, well, that is beautiful." But Blackmore just sort of gives you the finger and says, "Right, now I'm just going to make a bloody racket for a minute, and then come back into some technical playing." And
Yeah.
there's
Yeah.
something
Yeah.
about that I just really
Yeah.
love.
There's a funny thing with Deep Purple. I remember, I think I said this to Tony and somebody else we interviewed, where we're talking about Deep Purple. I remember seeing a punk documentary on BBC Two, I think it was a few years ago, and Vic Goddard was on there from Subway Sect, and he said that secretly all the punks still loved their Deep Purple records. They just couldn't admit it anymore, you know. And I think there's that song, isn't there, that Purple song, "Burn." I think no matter how into, if you're going through a techno phase or an R&B phase, whatever you're into, if "Burn" comes on, you've got to listen, haven't you?
There's so many great stuff in that catalogue.
Mm.
I know fans, a bit like with Bowie or Prince or anyone, they'll go for certain eras. Like I'll go for
Yeah,
Bowie's Berlin period. That's my favorite. But
me too.
for
Yeah.
me, I think the whole Purple catalogue, there's some great stuff from the early 60s stuff where it's a bit psychedelic and a bit kind of weird and poppy and Beatlesy and stuff. Right
Mhm.
to like Come Taste the Band with
Mm.
Tommy Bolin on guitar, where it's more
Yeah, for sure.
I mean, that's great. And then the
Yeah.
stuff after it is still okay. I mean, I miss Richie not being in the ranks, but they've had some great
Mhm.
players.
Mm.
But like anybody, I guess their first sort of 10-year period is the one. That's where they made their name, and that's what we're always going to
Mm.
go back to. Even though they're
Mhm.
making good records and they get annoyed that no one talks about those new records. But you
Mm.
can't help it. Newman's the same. He always like, oh, people hark on about Tubeway Army to like I Assassin or Warriors,
Mhm.
79 to 83. Oh, I did other stuff. It's like, yeah, you did, man. But you got to remember, a lot of us grew up in that time when you were massive, and it means a lot to us. We're not
Mhm.
just going to give it up for the new stuff.
Mhm. Yeah, for sure.
Difficult.
So another thing that I always like to get into, because I studied psychology for a while, I kind of still am doing.
Oh,
So I
wow.
like to kind of get into what makes you tick as a person, how you see the world as well.
Yeah.
So you've played with lots of globally recognized artists. Have
Yeah.
they had an effect on you, who you are, how you behave?
Yeah. Everyone I've met and worked with, has had some sort of influence, whether it be positive or negative.
Mm.
Depends on the situation. Working with Peter Gabriel was only a couple of days. Um, but over a week or so. But there's something about, they say don't meet your heroes, but he was absolutely wonderful. And whenever he was in the room, there was an amazing kind of sense of calm. once I'd got over the nerves, because I was actually booked to go to Real World, which is his studio, which is literally 15 minutes from my front door.
Mm.
And I didn't know I was working with him. So I turn up with my beaten old Escort, and they said, "Oh, we'll get the drums out." I said, "No, I'll do it." They said, "Oh no, you go and have some coffee, and we'll bring it over." Anyway, and then the band eventually turned around and go, "We didn't tell you because we thought you'd freak out." And I was like, "Well, no, I am going to freak out." It was unreal, but there was this lovely feeling of calm and peace when he was around. There was no stress. The way he approached the music, the way he talked to the engineer, the way he talked to us, the way he was very open about stuff, saying, "I don't really know what I'm going to do here. Any ideas, go?" The way he was it was just kind of all those things that you would hope one of your heroes would be like, open to your ideas. It was like, and he's like, "Rob, what do you think? You know, should I be, is it?" And it's just like, you're asking me. I mean, you know, you've just scored one of the biggest albums of all time. So, you know, in '86 and or '85, whenever it was, and this was '93 maybe, and I'm just thinking this is unreal. But I learned a lot from how he sort of kind of people managed. That was very interesting. And when I worked with Lorena McKinnett, who's like a Celtic world artist, she's very over the top. So for instance, I was playing a shaker part, and she was saying to me, I don't want it to be like a funky shake or whatever. And, you know, when you come back, does it do something different? I said, well, it's just the other side of the beat, you know. And she said, well, I want you to imagine you're in the shaker and all this kind of stuff. And when I was playing a drum part, she said, I want you to imagine expansive open fields, or maybe there's a lake and some mountains and you're shooting across it like the helicopter when they film that stuff, and really low to the water. And some people switch off. That turns me on completely. And just seeing the way she could get things across, and thinking in colors with music, you know, thinking colors, this is a very green feeling. And that was amazing. And to see how people again at Real World reacted, the musicians reacted, me included, because I wasn't ready for that, was very interesting. So I've learned to take bits from that. And when I'm talking to somebody, don't just use the musical terms, you know, use the space, you know, use everything, you know, use the light and the dark. Mark Hollis with Talk Talk was the same. He would, you know, put sort of weird little cartwheel light things in the studio and strobes and things to get certain effects. And I don't think we can underestimate that. I mean, putting a sheet of music in front of someone and someone playing it is great, but that's not my bag. When I've worked with Alison Goldfrapp, it's a similar thing. They're all of these people I could mention, they all do the same kind of thing. They all try and get you thinking of something that's really kind of natural and earthly. But they're not trying to say, right, now what I want you to do is play forte for this measure, and then you're going to, you know, because I'm not into that, you know. So
you worked with Mark Hollis?
I wish I had. I worked with David Rhodes, who played guitar on the Colour of Spring and the Spirit of Eden albums, and he shared some stories with me because I'm a massive Talk Talk fan. And he shared some of those stories about what it was like working with him. And he would literally sometimes say, I'm not going to tell you what key this is in, and I'm not going to tell you where beat one is. You just go in the room and you play what you feel and what you hear, you know. And I just thought, that's an amazing. I said, what did you do? He said, I did exactly that. They started running the tape. The rhythm, I didn't know where it was. It wasn't like a straight beat. He said, so I just started playing, and they recorded everything that I did. And Mark at the end, it was like, thank you, that's perfect. And David was like, but because the Colour of Spring was more structured, wasn't it? More song-like. Now this was kind of open, and Laughing Stock as well was just open. And he said, no, that's perfect, David. You know, thank you, that's brilliant. We got all we need,
Wow.
man. It was just
that was so interesting. When I was away with Ricky, Ben the guitarist, Ben also plays in the Sisters of Mercy, and Ben and I were chatting. And Ben's listened to a lot of music in the genres you'd imagine. And it was one day on the bus where he just turned around and he said to Ricky, he said, what would you recommend I listen to? Something completely left field, something I've never heard before,
right?
But the one thing I should hear. And Ricky turned around and he said, Talk Talk, or anything by Mark Hollis. And it's like, he's one of those artists that it's like Peter Perrett. I think all musicians know who that is and they love his stuff. And I said the same to my son recently. I said, if you're looking for new directions and new influences, go and listen to Talk Talk, because they're almost unique. And how timeless is all of that stuff, Mark Hollis stuff, isn't it?
It is, and I think he said, I want people to put on from the Colour of Spring onwards, the last three albums or so. He said, I want people to drop the needle, or however we're going to play it in the future, to listen to it and not think, oh, that's got to be 86 because of the DX7, or, or whatever, or the Lindrum, or whatever. He said, or the certain guitar effect that's in. He said, I wanted these things to be timeless, and they are. You listen to Colour of Spring, Laughing Stock, and Spirit of Eden, and you couldn't put a date on them, and they're just very, very unique. And I think, that people that I've talked about, Siouxsie as well. I mean, I could talk for ages about all these people, and Jim Kerr, all these people, but they've all got something in common. They all look beyond the notes. And they all get, I have done sessions where it's just the sheet music and say, play, there's the click, and off you go. But the greatest ones are the ones that I like to talk about and put on my CV. They're the ones which share a similar thing. There's a real love for music, and it's getting inside the notes. We all know what we're playing. We're not trying to be the fastest or the loudest. We're trying to make music. We're trying to make this song that someone's just played us. You know what this is like. All of us do. You're trying to make it come to life, and the ego goes to the back door. And if someone starts saying, "Hey, man, this is Pink or Puce," I'm not going to turn around and laugh and say, "What the hell?" I'm like totally into it. I'm like, right, okay, Turquoise. What would that sound like on the drums? Okay, what tempo is this? And, you get so deep into it. That's why I get so much session work, because I can work like that. And when I'm equally working with other people, as I said earlier, I try and bring all those elements in. I mean, I just did 2 days at Real World, which is expensive, with a band that had never played the songs before. We had to do 8 songs in 2 days, and it was kind of like you dig deep, think, right, what have I seen Suzie do? What have I seen Lorena do? What have I seen all these people do? And the engineers as well at Real World. What have I seen them do? What have I learned? And we got it done. And I think how it's affected me in my life is, I mean, just driving home from Yellow White today, just understanding and feeling beauty in the weirdest kind of spaces and places. That's what it's taught me. Just walking the streets of Newport last night on the Isle of Wight, trying to find something to eat while Steve was doing his part of the drum clinics. He said, "You've got to go and eat," and I couldn't find anything because it was shut. So if you ever go to the Isle of Wight, get into somewhere before 9 o'clock. Just seeing random stuff around the place and just enjoying that, and not just walking around the streets or meeting people and just thinking, oh, that's just that. Really connecting with people, connecting with places. It's really taught me to be, I mean, some people say you're a bit of a hippie now. It's not, it's, if you, that's what you want to see it as, that's great. But it's made me see the world in a very, very different way, and opened up a lot of things to me that weren't there before when I was younger, because you're not ready. But when you get older, you're ready to make these connections. Yeah, it's fascinating, I think, in how you communicate with other people changes. Instead of just sort of having a very fleeting conversation with someone, digging in a bit deeper and finding out something, and getting a bit further, that sort of thing. I think as musicians we're good at that, because that's what we do on the stage. We're good at digging for these nuggets, and when we're jamming. So I think we can do it socially. And when I see people that can't do that, maybe the pinstripe suit boys and girl brigade, that kind of thing. Nothing against it, but when I'm with those people at parties or whatever, I after hello and what do you do? Oh, that's interesting. What do you really do? No, I'm a musician. Yeah, come on, what do you really do? And they've got the Tesla, and they've got the life and the wife and the boyfriend, whatever they want. And there's just something about that, the way they speak and the way they live. It just isn't my world. They're missing out.
I love that.
So
I
much.
love that certain phrase you use, digging for nuggets.
Yes.
That's nicely observed. There was I can't go into too much detail. There's a situation recently I was in where I needed a drummer for something, and a couple of names came up, and my wife happened to turn around and say the guy that wanted it hadn't been a drummer professionally, done something else for most of his career. Right. And had that security in the Tesla and all that stuff. And the guy that I wanted to use hadn't had that. He'd drummed all his life and paid the price largely for living in poverty a lot of the time, although he's a brilliant, brilliant player. Yeah. And that's what my wife turned around and said. She said, person A has got the house, has got the cars, got the comfort, but hasn't spent his life, as you would say, digging for nuggets. Whereas my other friend has absolutely devoted his life to that and came in and nailed the tracks and did something, as you said, so unexpected. It was almost he hadn't been listening to the same song.
Brilliant.
Which transformed it, totally transformed it. And he said to me, I didn't really know what to do, so is this okay?
Wow, that's lovely. See, that's the sort of thing I mean. These people bring in, you know, beauty, and you just sit there. I've been in a similar situation. You sit behind the glass or upstairs, or wherever the desk is compared to the live room, and you're listening, and you're just looking at each other, going, "What the, what? This is," and you're just speechless. And they come in and go, "Was that all right?" And you're like,
Yeah.
well, listen to what you've done to my music. It's beautiful. You've brought this thing to life. It's amazing. And that's what I'm saying. That's that feeling. And I've had it when people have sometimes, I've been on sessions where I've been told that Manu Katché is being flown in next week. And I'm going, oh, great. I'm sort of just, playing, the patsy, for a while. And then he's going to come in and do all his splashy stuff that he does and all that business. And then go again, and say, au revoir, tout le monde. And then he'll be off again with his 7 or 8 grand, fair play, because he's one of my favorite players. He really is. But it was wonderful when I was just doing my thing and I didn't let it phase me. It was over lunch at Real World, and of course I just kept eating. I was a bit like, oh, great, okay, brilliant. But I thought, no, you're getting paid. Just be professional. And then 3 or 4 days later, we were again having lunch, or maybe it was dinner. I don't know. And the same question was asked. The guitarist said, "Is Manu coming out?" And I won't say who this was, and the singer said, "Oh no, no, we don't need him now." And I was going, yeah, because even though I'm not the known man, I mean, Manu is way up there, like Vinny and all those guys, they're way up there. But it doesn't mean that the rest of us, sort of foot soldiers, like the Dad's Army drummers who are doing everyday stuff, high and low, pubs, and then the stadium, then pubs again, and then clubs, and then doesn't mean we haven't got some beauty to bring to the table. And again, that's something that I've learned from working with these people. You bring the right people, you trust people, you don't just go for the names because, yeah, that's great. And I've got stories, I'm sure you guys have, about some great players who remain nameless, obviously, that you hear stories and you're like, really? And they're like, yeah, oh yeah. And you're like, my God, but I thought he or she was like, it's like, yeah, but there you go. That's why we've got you. Do you know what I mean? That's why we've got you. And I was like, oh, wow. So it gives you faith as well that your direction and, your sales are going in the right direction. Everything's
interesting.
You're
I love that. I love that. I love that. Tony, are you there? Do you want to come in with your specific Siouxsie questions or whatever you had ready?
Oh.
Yes, I have specific questions that I've been asked to ask you.
Oh dear.
About Siouxsie. Well, I saw you actually at Cruel World.
Oh man, what a gig that was!
With the thunderstorm, and then you guys had to come back the next day. And but prior to that, the very first show that you guys did, I don't know if it was Paradiso.
I think that was the second. I can't. Was it Belgium? Was Belgium the first one?
Belgium was the first one, and we had a fan in the crowd, and she sent me a picture, and I posted it, and it was the very first picture.
Wow!
I swear it went viral. It had hundreds of thousands of views, and like her comeback, right? So
yeah.
How did you guys prepare for that, and how did it feel to play that festival at the end of that run?
Wow, it was, well, actually that was in the middle of the run. That was
oh, I'm sorry. Yeah.
No, that's fine. It was kind of weird because we did the first 3 as warm up, even though they're proper venues. They weren't, as you know, they were proper venues, proper gigs. But we were just warming ourselves up for that one, and then we had like a month off, and then we did a whole host of other ones in Madrid and other places and stuff. But the year before, Doug got on the phone on the blower and said, "Listen, we're going to do some headline tours next year. Headline slots. She's only headlining wherever she plays, pretty much." And we're like, "Whoa!" And there's some big ones. There's going to be a huge one. He said, "But I'm not going to tell you about it just yet because you might crap yourself." So we're like, "Okay, fine." So what we did, we would rehearse maybe once every 3 months, but for a week, and we just fell back into it slowly but surely. Siouxsie hadn't sang for a while, and her voice was sounding stronger than on some of the last legs of the stuff we did, which was probably 3 or 4 years ago. So we were all happy about that as she was. We looked at bringing in new songs into the set, things that we'd practiced before, but we never actually played them, like Peekaboo, things like that. Cities in Dust and what have you. We've done a few times, but it was great. And then we started to ramp it up towards the end of the year before, and maybe sort of we got together once every month for the last 3 months for another week, maybe week and a half. And then we go into January and we're still in that sort of form. And then by March, I think we were out and about doing it. I think, or maybe it was earlier than, maybe it's February we were in Europe. But it felt great, you know. She wasn't going to wear the cat suit. She wanted to wear this sort of big flowing silver dress. She, a bit like Prince, she wanted to wear, like, instead of wearing high heels, she wanted to wear like these sort of trainers that were really padded. She wasn't going to do the scissor kicks anymore. She, you know, really sort of wanted to refine gracefully, the thing that unfortunately Madonna didn't do. You know, she's trying to grow gracefully, but disgracefully as well, but gracefully. She just didn't want to present herself as that, like we did on Manta Ray and the tours after that. And we all thought that was a really good idea, you know, because it's a toned down affair, but it actually delivered more power because she wasn't doing the kicks and the stuff. It actually delivered in a different way, and it hit in a different way. And the first 3 gigs were very good. Bit nervy. We were all a bit nervy, we have to say, since COVID. None of us have. I mean, yeah, I mean, that was my first big gig since COVID. I've done nothing of those sizes since COVID, me personally. I was just in the studio after COVID. So that was a little bit weird. I had some anxiety issues, as did Sue. We all did. But in that 2-week period after the last European show, I did a lot of meditation and got myself together. The other guys in the band did similar things. And then when we got out, we were ready to hit Cruel World. We were ready to hit it hard. And, you know, you were there. It was 20 minutes before we were about to go on. And we'd seen all this forked lightning during Iggy's set, but we were like, it'll be fine. And then, of course, it's pulled, and the bass player burst into tears because we'd been ready for this. You know, all these rehearsals, all those first 3 gigs, everything was, you know, we were primed and ready. This was the biggest one. They were all important to us. All the gigs, by the way, anyone listening, they were all important to us, and they're special in different ways. But you can't deny that the Cruel World was the big hitter. And there was a lot of tears, a lot of anger, a lot of frustration. But of course, we all understood that people's lives are more important. Then it got a little bit ugly, didn't it? People started bottling the stage, and we were worried they were going to break through and come backstage. It got a bit nasty for a while, and we were on site for 4 hours anyway. We couldn't leave because it was carnage with people everywhere and stuff. So that's when I first, you know, one of the best times I hang out with Gary, because Gary Numan came over and we just talked for hours, all of us, you know. But that feeling of going out on that stage on the Sunday night when Iggy came back and Numan came back and we did it again. Well, we did our bit, and we were given longer. It was the best feeling. I can't tell you how good that was. The nerves disappeared. Just hearing that audience ready for Sue. The minute we walked out, it was, you know, I mean, you were there. You know, it was spine tingling, hair lifting, and it was all that stuff. Goose pimples. And looking back, I've got a picture up there that I'll just bring it up for you. I took this picture from my drum riser.
Oh wow! Yeah.
And I've got that up on my wall because I just thought I got the best seat in the house. I mean, the drummer has on any gig anyway, because you're on a drum riser, so you've always got the best gig in the house, best seat in the house. But it was just phenomenal, and we partied all night into the next day, and we flew back a day later, I think. But it was the biggest show I've ever done, the biggest one she's done for a while. And again, she delivered. There was nothing. If we were going to look back on any set, some were a bit like, whoa, that was a bit dodgy at times. But that one was just solid. You could just feel, if you could see our auras, they were all kind of merging together. It was just beautiful. And the audience. And it was 2-way. It wasn't just, right, we're presenting this to you. You guys were giving it back tenfold, which meant everything we did, we were giving back tenfold. It get a bit emotional now thinking about it. It was phenomenal. Phenomenal.
Yes, that organization of Golden Voice, you know, they're great, and I mean, you know, safety first, and then you guys got to come back the next day and killed it, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, we were all backstage for ages thinking it's going to be pulled, and then Doug said, "What about tomorrow?" And all the organisers were like, "Don't be stupid, that's ridiculous." And then they all disappeared again, and they were having these meetings. An hour later, they said, "Look, there's the backstage area. Just drain it dry. Just drink it dry. Just do it. Just relax. You guys aren't going anywhere till 4 or 5 a.m. anyway, because we can't get out of this bloody place. You know, it's like 60,000 people all panicking now, thinking they're going to get struck by lightning, you know." Yeah, so that was just mental. And then eventually they came back and they said, guys, we are coming back tomorrow. And it was just the best feeling. It was like, yes, that makes perfect sense. But I also know a lot of people couldn't come back and they were very upset. And some people were very vocal about that on the social media. And we still apologize for that. You know, like Susie was gutted, but what can we do? You know, for the 40 who came back, or 45 that came back, or maybe it was more, that was, you know, it was something for them. We can't just turn it off for everybody. The tap was turned on again and we could play again, and that was the biggest issue. But I'm still apologizing to people that couldn't make it if they ever comment on my YouTubers. I'm like, sorry that you had to fly back to New York. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry we played, but we had to do it, you know. There's no way we couldn't.
Of course. And any plans for the future, or anything that you can hint? Are there going to be?
And yeah, we're going to be getting together. That's about all I can say at the moment. But yeah, but kind of watch this space. You know, it's not dead in the water. Let's put it that way, which is great because my heart is very much in that band. You know, as I said earlier, when I was watching it on TV, I had no idea that I would ever be working with her. If someone said Gary Numan, I'd love that because I was a fan. But for someone like Sue, it was just like, well, she's weird, but that's a good song. Okay, next. That was it. I never thought I would have ended up playing with one of the queens of punk. You know, never, ever.
Yeah, yeah. Gary's great. He lives here in Los Angeles, and I'm friends with one of his daughters. Of her videos out. She was very excited, and she's very excited every time we put one of Gary's videos up. And we found one that it was a demo. It was like a promotional video for a record label, and they never did anything with it. So we restored it to 4K, and he saw it, and he doesn't talk to me, but the daughter does, and yeah, I mean, he has a great family, great wife that loves him, and he's a family man, and everything they do together. He's a great person. Gary Numan, great.
I think so.
Yeah,
and when I met him, he was lovely. I mean, I have to confess that I had the red stripe in my hair because when I think the second year of the Manta Ray tour, I wanted to do something from the even though I'm on a big, massive 6-foot riser or whatever, 4-foot riser anyway. I mean, it's quite big. Some of them bigger than others. I wanted to do something, and I just remember Gary Numan putting that red streak in his hair, like for the I Die You Die video and the Telecon tour in 1980. And I remember I went to school the next day and all my friends were going, did you see Gary with that in his hair on top of the pops? And we're like, yeah, amazing. So I thought, I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to put it in. And I did. And I put it in. And when I met him, I had to confess. I said, man, I'm so sorry. I was pointing at it. And he was going, what? I said, well, I got this from you. Like, he said, did you? He said, because I stole it from someone else anyway. He said, I was going out with a Japanese girl at the time, and it was kind of like a Japanese manga type thing or whatever. I'd seen some animation of this red streak, and I was like, well, I stole it as well. So thank you for that. But yeah, he's a lovely man. And I'd love to work with him one day, but I know his crew, and rightly so, are very close knit, as any, like the Suzie band. They're all very close knit, as it should be. That's why it sounds so good. It's like a family. But I would love to work with him, or even remote something with him, you know, with their electronic drums, you know, programming or live stuff. It would be great. But
he was so ahead of his time that his music is so relevant now. I mean, he's amazing. Everything that he does, it's amazing. Great. The synth,
I agree with you.
The electronic part, and obviously bands like Nine Inch Nails bring him all the time on tour, and Ministry, and all these bands that are heavier, but he can bring it up to the level. I mean, he can play heavy if he wants to, and he does. So
he does.
He's relevant. I
mean, his set Cruel World, the minute it started, you know, our dressing room area was shaking. It was like bloody hell, bass in that set, you know. And even when he did the older songs, which you think would lack a bit of the beef of the new ones, they'd obviously beef them up too. So hearing some of those tracks on Replicas and Pleasure Principle, but with that same industrial sound, it was amazing. And I think you're right. And we were just talking, me and a friend of mine the other day, about Berserker, which came out in 1984, where he wore all the blue makeup and the white face and the blue makeup and blue hair. I mean, a really scary image. And it wasn't the most popular of Numan period. He was sort of on his sort of way down into that depression at that point, but he was still doing quite well. But that sound in '84 sounded like nothing else that was around in
Mhm.
the charts. You got Madonna, you got Prince, all that other stuff that was kicking off, all great. But then you had this guy in white makeup and blue, white face, blue makeup, playing this heavy industrial music, singing about dying machines and all that, and totally against the grain. And it only got to maybe 40 in the UK chart. But they've just reissued it and remastered it. And listening to it again, you think he was way before his time. Even with this sound, certainly Our Friends Electric was way before on Cars. But then he's done it, like you said, like through different decades. He's managed to keep up,
Yeah,
but not
yeah,
really want to keep up, but just doing it because it's what he does.
that's
Um,
what he does. Yeah.
he influences so many people. And I was talking to his keyboard player, Chris Payne, the other day. Um, he was a great guy, and he was there on all those earlys from 79 to about 86. And we were talking about that, and he was saying the same thing. He said Gary was brilliant. He said sometimes like, he was working on the Moog or the Moog, whatever, and he'd be there for ages, and I'd be leaning over, going, "Gary, what?" About, and he wouldn't answer because he's Aspergic as well, so he wouldn't answer, and he would just be. And he said, "Right, that's the sound," and he'd go, "Oh right, yeah, okay, brilliant." He said, "I want that sound every time if you can. That's the dials." And he was like, "Yeah, okay." He said, "But the point being that he took as much time as he needed to get, he wasn't going to put up with anything that wasn't quite the thing. He could hear it. Obviously, with these dials, you can't find them. It's a nightmare, isn't it? But he said, when I get it, I'll know it. And he spent ages. But that kind of attention to detail is what makes him great as well. I think that's really, really important. The sound of what he wants to produce. It's not just, oh, well, that'll do, let's get it out. It's kind of like, no, I'm going to do this for a week if I have to, because it will mean everything when I find it. And that to me is like a true artist.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, he's great. He's great. Rich, interesting here to have like kind of the rhythmic section. You're a bass player and Robert, a drummer.
Excellent.
Any like how do you guys work together in a rhythmic section of a band? Like does the bass player keep you you guys work together to keep the rhythmic section going, or how can you explain that to somebody like me that doesn't know how
I
that
mean,
works?
I've done it at different ways over my career, to be honest. But I think one of the things I've enjoyed more about playing over the last 6 or 7 years, I think I've enjoyed kind of dominating it more. So I think if I decide this is the speed we're going to go at, and I'm just going to put it down. And I found that a lot of drummers really enjoy that. When I went and did those gigs in Germany was it this year? Last year, I can't remember. But that was one of the things I did there. Like, kind of, if there's a big groove, I'm thinking I'm just going to play this, and you're all coming with me. And I think it's almost like if you're going out for dinner and somebody can't make a decision about where to eat, and one guy goes, "We're going here," everybody's secretly happy. And I can
Yeah.
see the pleasure that gives drummers sometimes, where I think this is it. Trust me, come with me. And I've very much started playing like that. And drummers are a strange one. I've said this to a few people. I've said to people that I think drumming is almost unique in music. That my experience has been that drummers are either world class or they're not. And there can be fantastic drummers, but the
Yeah.
guys that are world class are different. And I've played with a few of those guys across genres, but they just have one thing in common: they make the basses sound better. And sometimes I've played on albums, and I've played on albums, and I've listened back and thought, Christ, that's brilliant. Is that me? And it's because the drummer is making me sound so good. And it's kind of hard to quantify what that is, but there's kind of a quiet confidence in some drummers. It's not all technique. Some of it is like a feel or an attitude, an open-mindedness. But it's quite a different skill set, I think, being in the rhythm section. But I'll tell you what, Rob will definitely tell you this: that if the rhythm section's right, they can be doing next to nothing, and that band sounds brilliant. And if the rhythm section isn't right, they can have all the tricks in the world, and it will not work. And I can't quite put my finger on why that is, but maybe that little quote earlier, digging for nuggets. Maybe it's once you find that thing and you're confident in it, or you know it's going to come. It's like the opposite of panicking somehow. Just having a confidence that it's going to be good. So that would be my take on it. Rob, what do you think?
Well, I agree with all of that, man. Definitely. And there's when a bass player takes the lead, if we take that scenario for a second, you know, you have to have the confidence in your bass player to do that, because as a drummer equally you're thinking, well, I should be stating this. And when you've got a bass player that you can feel is just, it's not pulling you, it's just kind of almost nudging up to you, it's like that's where it should be. Because if I start pushing a bit, then you start pushing, and then the guitarist is going, right, what's going on here? We've got this holy war of the rhythm section. It's this trust. So all the greatest bass players I've worked with, like you said about drummers, Richard, you have faith, and you don't even have to be looking at them. You could be in another town plugged in with the headphones on, and that you're locked into that groove because you trust each other. You're not fighting for supremacy. I've had situations where, as I'm sure you have, where it doesn't sit. The bass player's determined to go on their merry way, and they're not. It's almost, you feel like saying, are you actually listening to anything that I'm playing? Because especially if I'm on a click, and I've got this feeling good, the spirit is there. It's not just metronomic, it's got the vibe, but I don't feel you're on this vibe. So we mentioned communication earlier, and a lot of it is I want to sit down with the bass player and say, listen, are we on the same page? Like, let's talk. How are you feeling this thing? And again, a bit like those artists we spoke, get in the spaces. Like, how are you feeling that ba-boom? Is it ba-boom? Is it straight, or ba-boom on the bass? How are you feeling that? Because anything I play on my hat, my grace notes, bass drum, all of it is going to flam if we're not together. Or equally, if the bass player looks at me and goes, man, this should be straight, not swung when you're doing all of that stuff. All of a sudden, it's like, what was a take that was a bit like this suddenly does that. And it never changes. And it's like a relationship that just works. It's absolutely solid. And even if someone goes off, I'm confident we're going to come back. And we're going to come back. And that's hard to get. There's only very few bass players in my life. I mean, I've had quite a few, but certain ones that, you could set the clock by them. You just know it's always going to be there, and it's tasteful as well. That's the other thing. Same with drummers, I bet. For you, Richard, sometimes drummers can be a bit outlandish and a bit over the top, flamboyant, when maybe it's not needed. Same with bass players. But again, when you've got that relationship, it's just the best thing. And when it's hand in glove like that, it's just the best. So when people are listening, they don't even know that. They shouldn't. They should just be feeling that it's really good. That's all that matters. It's that feeling of what that feels like. And any of those records behind us, I've got here, they've all got that in, what's the saying, in droves, or what was the saying, is in something or other. Spades. They are. They've got it in spades.
Absolutely. There was a drummer I worked with once. I remember seeing his cowbell in rehearsal, and on his cowbell he had a piece of gaffer tape, and on the gaffer tape he'd written, "Stay cool, play less."
Love it.
Yeah,
love it.
I mean, and he played everywhere. He played Hollywood Bowl. He played everywhere, and he had that. He said, "I still need to remind myself."
It's so true. And me and Steve, I was doing a clinic last night with Steve White in the Isle of Wight. And of course, he's done Paul Weller and lots of different Style Council and lots of different acid jazz stuff. And it was one of the things we were saying when we were sat at the front, and it was a Q&A with the punters there. And we said, just play less. If you're that drummer that if you think you're playing too much, you probably are, strip it down to the basic groove. Listen to those old Parliament records and, Charlie Watts and all those things. You could throw out loads of different things. But where there's no fancy stuff, it's just the solid groove. No even booms on the bass, just 1 and 3. Listen to how that grooves and what the bass player is doing. You don't need to do nothing else. Then build on that if you want to, but get that done first. Then you can start adding the theatrics if it's needed. And of course, most of the time it's not. And the smallest little da-da-dum bosh means a lot more than blah, 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 blah. And that's what I've learned. I learned that very quickly working in the studio, very quickly when I was a kid. It's like, not to do too much. And it was hurtful at the time, because you think, oh, I've practiced to do all this stuff, I just want to use it. And then it's like you suddenly think, oh, I'm playing the song, I'm not just drumming, I'm playing somebody's music. And funny enough, I saw a quote from Vinnie Colaiuta the other day saying the very same thing, saying that when he was younger he would be thrown out of sessions because he could say, I'll read anything, you write it out for me, I can play it all, the Zappa, I've got it all down. But then he suddenly realized that when he was sacked from these sessions, he wasn't actually playing the song, he wasn't playing music, he was just playing drums. And that's something that I try and put into all my students, that information. It's you can play drums well, but play music well. They're kind of two different things. You know what I mean? It's like someone sitting there all over the bass and doing all this stuff, but then they can't sit down and make Brown Sugar feel good or something. It's just like, whoa, something's missing there. It's great to have the technique, but you've got to get this bit together.
Sure. So has that answered your question, Tony?
Sorry.
Yeah. No, absolutely. You know, here in Los Angeles, I've spoken with some bands. I guess I'll mention the names, but these are bands that had jazz background drummers, and that's what made them famous. Like the Dead Kennedys, even a thrash metal band, Megadeth. They had a jazz drummer. And what are your thoughts on that, of mixing that up, bringing somebody in that has a different background, but being able to play that punk or metal?
I think that's really interesting, because same in the jazz world, certain artists are working with people aren't just necessarily jazz drummers. They've got form in other spheres of music and genres, and I think that's really important. I think that's what keeps music fresh and keeps music bubbling. You know, it's always good if like-minded people meet. That's great, but sometimes you can bring in someone that you think, what, a classical player coming in, what's that going to do? Then all of a sudden, yeah, but we're going to put this violin through some effects pedals. What have you got? And you're like, geez, that's like something we've never heard before, you know. And because you've got the chops, you can like pull back if you need to, whereas someone who's sort of just having a go will be good and a bit naive, but they might not have the chops when they need it. So it's good to have, like we say, this sort of technique and the musicality thing. I love it. I'm always very excited when I read a drummer or a band that are influenced, you know, by other styles of music and bring in other things in, because that's what I do. I do that in my music making and in my drumming. I love that. So when people say to me, "Are you a jazz drummer?" I go, "No." "But you play jazz?" "Yeah, but I'm not a jazz drummer." You know, when I'm with Arena, I'm a Celtic world drummer playing darabukas and finger cymbals and that. When I'm with Siouxsie, I'm a punk drummer. You know, when I play with Jamie Cullum or something, I'm a jazz drummer. It's just all that. That is what I love. It's not everyone's bag, but I dig it. So, yeah, more of that, please. I would say, Tony, in the world. What about you, Rich? What do you think?
I don't know. It's difficult. I listen to loads and loads of different music, but funny enough, I don't think you can choose this stuff. I've gone a different way by accident. I mean, I remember. I mean, Wayne and the Mission used to say to me, Peter used to say to me, and Ricky said, I can always tell when it's you playing. And I think that happened to me by accident. I think I've got a thing where my playing's very intimate or groovy, and I think I think my personality comes out in my playing, and I don't think I can stop it. It's just how it is. So lots of people have said to me, I knew which of the tracks are you. You know, you just have that, and I think it's just that's not something I tried to do. It's just I never seem to know what to do when a song comes in. I spent most of the time crapping myself. I remember one night when my son was here, and I'd done this bass take, and I said, "I'm about to send this off. What do you think?" And he went, "It's quite boring, Dad." I was like, "How dare you?" And he said, "Have you thought about playing on the snare as well?" I was like, "What does he know?" And I thought, I respect him and everything else, so I'm going to have to listen. So I did it, and then I went the other way and I played a load on the snare instead of the bass drum. And then I lost my nerve and I said, "I'm not going to send it now." And he said, "No, this is brilliant. Send it as it is." I went, "Okay, I'll just get rid of that comedy noodle at the end I put as a joke." He's like, "No, leave the whole thing. Leave everything. It sounds like you." And I sent it off, and I was so scared when I sent it off, I didn't open the email till next morning. I saw an email come back and I thought, "I'm not opening this." And then I opened the email, and thankfully the guy said, "It reduced me to tears what you played. Thank you, it's amazing." But at the time, I remember thinking, this doesn't even sound like what they play, what the guide was. But I thought, that's what they want. If they wanted the guide, they'd have kept it. You know,
Absolutely.
they must want me.
Those moments are wonderful, aren't they?
Yeah.
I had something similar with someone that I can't really talk about at the minute, but when it comes out, we'll be able to talk about it, and I'll let you guys know. Maybe you could promote a bit of it, because it's to do with that world we're talking about. And I just was remoting for him. He's in France, and I did all this stuff, and I was saying to the guy who was engineering it, I said, "Is that too on the nose, some of it, and is that too oblique?" And he was like, well, if you're hearing it, then it can't be, because you can see it on the music. And he said, I would have thought you were going to do that. He said, but that's you. But like yourself, Richard, that's what we're saying. It's wonderful to hear that. And I sent it, and it was the same thing. I was nervous, and I got this messenger thing back, and he was just like, I was like, with one eye closed, like, what's he going to say? Squinting at it. And he was over the moon. He said, it's the best thing he could have done. And he said, that marching snare, he said, yes, it is on the nose, but you know what? It's absolutely fantastic. That's going to be a major part of the song. So sometimes, like we said about this trusting and getting vibes and stuff, you've got to go with that, because that's why you get the work you do, and that's why I get the work I do, because we've got the love for the music. That's the thing, and we can hear it, and we can always close our eyes and see things, and almost touch things that aren't there, because that's what people want from us when they're sending us music, because we can give that. It's a good strength to have. Because your personality, it's your character, it's your personality, it's your imagination. No one else could have come up with that. It's kind of a unique thing, and long may it continue. It's one of the things that keeps me joyous in this world.
What are you listening to? Who are you listening to at the moment? What were your last 5 things last 3 things on Spotify?
One of them would be what are they called? Oh, the album's over there. Why do I forget the name? Dry Cleaning. I love that band, Dry Cleaning. They've gone quiet now. I don't know if they're split up or whatever, because some bands come and go, don't they? But they're on the 4AD label, and they're brilliant. So I love them. I love Devo. I was listening to some Devo. What was the other thing I was listening to the other day? Because I dug out my Spotify, because I don't use it because of, I get a bit arsy about that. But I thought, bugger it, I need to pick up a shared playlist, so I got back on it. I played.
Oh, wow, okay.
Infected, which I love. I know people go on about the album before that, which with This Is the Day, is that what it is on it? Which is great, but I prefer Infected. That album for me has got all those sounds from '86 that I love.
Brilliant.
Sinatra, there's the Frank Sinatra the other day. I've got the Capitol Years box set around here somewhere. I was leafing through that. And one more. What was the other one I've been? Oh God, Doves, actually. Doves. For the Black and White Town, that tune. Da, 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 da. Okay, I think it's called Life in a Satellite Town or something. That one, that single. I just love that. So yeah, pretty random.
Brilliant. I love that. That's great. Okay. Tony, have you got any more questions up your sleeve there?
Well, not really. I only want to ask Robert if you have anything that you want to plug about your lessons, your private lessons online, or for the audience to know, and if they're interested.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I'm doing a lot of drum teaching. Obviously, face to face is great from a studio in the West Country in the UK, but I'm also doing online lessons. So if you want to get in touch, I'll give the guys my email address, and you can plug that for me. So, and also mentoring. I've been doing a lot of mentoring for people as well, and also production stuff. I'm getting into producing. So if there's any track out there, young bands want any of the bands that I've worked with, those sort of influences and other stuff, please contact me, because I'm really getting into that and getting some good stuff that's going to be dropped quite soon, actually. And also drum clinics. I'm out there doing clinics. If you're a drum school or whatever, university, and you want me to come out, or a drum store, then I can do that as well. Sometimes just me, sometimes with Steve White, and I've got other drum buddies that we can do double headers. So, and also just check Instagram and all that, and YouTube. I'll give the guys all my details, and
we'll definitely plug all that in. Thank you very much. And I'll let Richard finish his questions, and thank you very much for everything.
No worries, Tony. Thank you so much for having me on board. It was brilliant. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
I've just got a couple of questions to end with. It's in a pairing. So, number 1, what has been your biggest mistake in life? And number 2, what has been your best decision in life?
Best decision in life is to play drums, and to play drums as a career and get down that musical path for all the things that I've said before. It's brought so much into my life, my personality, my character, my love of life, my love of other people. Again, I know it sounds hippie, but it's very, very true. So that was the best thing I ever did, even though it's tough at times, as we all know, but I love it. And what was the one before that? Sorry?
Biggest mistake in life.
Playing drums. I would say biggest mistake. Well, there's a few, but musically, I would say, and I don't know if it's a mistake, but I should have got into the writing situation earlier. You know, I should have got into writing music. Thought more about parts and the discussion you have with people about parts in songs, those kind of things that you're not really, well, I suppose you are taught now at BIM and ACM, I guess, and those sort of seats of learning. But, you know, back in the sort of mid 80s and early 90s or whatever, it wasn't such a, you know, it wasn't so well known. If you weren't the songwriter, you know, anything you did wasn't going to be added. Sorry, yeah, you get a bit of this. I think if I'd had more business sense and got involved in the writing a bit more and understood that more, I wish I could have done that. Because actually, somebody asked me that last night. They asked me and Steve that, and Steve said the same thing. He wished he'd got into the writing and being more astute business-wise, you know, earlier on. But you know, hey, I'm still here and I'm still living, and I'm still happy, and my career's thriving. So obviously, I did something right. You know, we can't all be millionaires at 20, but
And what's your so over the next year? What's your dream for the year ahead?
Year ahead, I would. Oh, that's a really good question. I think again, it's kind of basic. It's kind of keep working, keep doing what I'm doing, keep meeting other drummers on my drum clinic tours. You know, keep getting the sessions that are coming in at the moment, which I can't talk about, but more of that coming in. You know, Suzie messaging us saying we're going to do something in a few weeks' time. You know, it's imminent. All that stuff, all that lovely stuff. I want to happen. I want everyone to be happy and peaceful. I want Donald Trump to be out of the White House. I want people to be happy again. Yeah, as I say, maybe I am an eternal hippie. I don't know, but I just think if enough people feel good things like that, it starts a little tremor that goes out further and further. Yeah, and I think that's what it's all about.
Yeah, I agree. I think that tremor does go out. We've spoken to a few people. I specifically didn't ask you how you feel about the world at the moment, just because I didn't want the answer. I've asked other people that, but I'm glad you brought Trump up, and I'm glad you brought up the little wave thing. That I seem to be spotting glimmers of hope coming from all sorts of different places. That maybe people are waking up, that we can do things differently.
I know, and I think people, you know, often used to laugh at John Lennon, for writing songs to try and change the world, and other people have done it since, of course. But you know, there's something in that. You know, musicians can give something. I'm sorry, we can. I mean, it's not going to save the world. I mean, Live Aid was a wonderful thing. All these things that we do, they're from the heart. They're not to make money for ourselves. You know, they're things that we really feel. And you've got enough people, like I say, causing a bit of a stir, that ripple effect, it does go on and on and on. And as you say, in America at the moment, it's really starting to kick off, and I hope that continues. You know, and I just feel sorry for these people that are people like Trump and Putin. I don't know what happened in their childhood that made them like this. It's very, very sad, because you know, they're missing all these beautiful things that we're talking about. They're seeing it in a different way, and it's very sad. But yeah, let's hope it's getting better. I just keep shoving that positivity out there, and you know, playing to a room full of people like like we all know, you turn up and you play to people, whether it be one man and his dog, or you know, or 10,000 people. You're touching somebody. You know, you're making a change. They go home and tell somebody else, they feel good. That buzz goes forward, and it's just a natural positive effect that we can keep doing. That's all we can do. We can't do anything else really. That and voting. That's all we can do. So I'm down for doing it.
For sure. Lovely. It's been a real pleasure, Rob. I've really, really enjoyed it. That has flown by. I think we've done over an hour, but it felt like 10 minutes. So thank you so much. It's been a real pleasure.
Well, thank you, Richard, and thank you, Tony. Thanks for having me. It was a real pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Thank you, Robert. And this will be out next week. And Richard, thank you as well. And you have good evening.
You too, Tony. Speak to you soon, guys. Bye.
Take care, guys. Bye.
See you again. Bye.
Bye.